Welcome back to Horror Shadows, where the past refuses to stay buried. Tonight's story comes from a woman who wished to remain anonymous, a registered nurse who took what she thought would be a simple job at a small-town high school. What she discovered in those patient files would challenge everything she understood about life, death, and the thin line that separates them. Margaret Chen always said that schools reminded her of hospitals, sterile hallways, the constant hum of fluorescent lights, and the unmistakable smell of disinfectant trying to mask something deeper, something older. She had no idea how right she was. This is the school nurse's patient files. Margaret had worked pediatric emergency rooms for 15 years before burning out. The long hours, the trauma, the constant parade of sick children, it had worn her down until she could barely sleep at night. So when the position opened up at Riverside High School, it seemed like a gift. Regular hours, basic first aid, the occasional fever check, a chance to heal from the heavier burdens of hospital work. Riverside High was built in 1962, a typical brick and concrete structure that had weathered decades of teenage drama and academic milestones. The nurse's office was located on the first floor, tucked between the main office and the guidance counselor's suite. On her first day, Margaret was greeted by Principal Davidson, a tired-looking man who seemed eager to hand over the responsibilities.
Mrs. Chen, thank you for taking this position. I have to be honest. We've had trouble keeping a nurse for more than a semester. The previous nurse, Mrs. Rodriguez, left rather suddenly.
He showed Margaret to a cramped office with outdated medical equipment and filing cabinets that looked like they hadn't been organized in years.
All the student medical records are in those files. Emergency contacts, medication lists, allergy information. Mrs. Rodriguez was very thorough in her documentation, perhaps too thorough.
There was something in his tone that made Margaret pause, but she attributed it to the stress of running a school. After Principal Davidson left, Margaret began examining the filing system. The current student files were organized alphabetically, but behind them was a second set of cabinets marked with years dating back to the school's opening. That's where she found the first anomaly. Mixed in with the current students were files for children from decades past. Students with dates of birth in the 1950s and 60s. Students who would now be in their 60s and 70s. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was that their most recent entries were dated within the last 6 months. Margaret's first week passed without incident. She handled the usual parade of headaches, scraped knees, and students trying to avoid tests. The mysterious old files remained in the back of her mind, but she attributed them to poor record-keeping. That changed on a Thursday afternoon in October. A student appeared in her doorway, a pale girl with dark circles under her eyes, wearing clothes that seemed oddly outdated. Her hair was styled in a way that reminded Margaret of old yearbook photos.
Excuse me, Mrs. Chen. I don't feel well. My chest hurts and I'm having trouble breathing.
Margaret immediately went into professional mode, guiding the girl to the examination bed and taking her vital signs.
What's your name, honey? Sarah Mitchell. I'm in Mrs. Henderson's chemistry class.
Margaret frowned. She'd met all the teachers during orientation, and there was no Mrs. Henderson on staff. But the girl looked genuinely ill. Her breathing was shallow, her skin had a grayish pallor, and her pulse was weak and irregular. Margaret pulled Sarah's file and felt her blood run cold. The folder was thick, decades old, with entries dating back to 1978. But according to the most recent entry, Sarah Mitchell had died in the school's chemistry lab fire on November 15, 1978. When Margaret looked up from the file, the examination bed was empty. Sarah Mitchell was gone. But on the pillow where her head had been was a small pile of ash that smelled distinctly of smoke and chemicals. Margaret searched the entire office, checked the hallways, even asked other teachers if they'd seen a pale girl in outdated clothes. No one had seen anyone matching Sarah's description. That night, Margaret researched the 1978 chemistry lab fire. 3 students had died from smoke inhalation when a Bunsen burner ignited stored chemicals. One of them was Sarah Mitchell, age 16. But according to Margaret's examination notes she remembered writing in her own handwriting, Sarah Mitchell had visited the nurse's office that very afternoon, complaining of chest pain and difficulty breathing, the same symptoms that had killed her 45 years ago. Margaret told herself it was stress, the transition to a new job, the unfamiliar environment, maybe some kind of elaborate student prank. But deep down, she knew what she'd experienced was real. The visits continued. Tommy Rodriguez appeared on a Tuesday, complaining of severe stomach cramps. His file showed he'd died from a ruptured appendix in 1984, a death that could have been prevented if the school nurse had recognized the symptoms sooner. Jennifer Walsh came in with a splitting headache and sensitivity to light. Her file revealed she died from meningitis in 1991 after being sent home from the nurse's office with what was diagnosed as a simple headache. David Kim arrived with chest pains and shortness of breath. Heart attack, 1996, age 17. The nurse at the time had dismissed it as anxiety. Each visit followed the same pattern. The student would appear with symptoms matching their historical cause of death. Margaret would find their decades-old file with recent entries that she somehow remembered writing. Then they would vanish, leaving behind only trace evidence of their presence. But Margaret began to notice something else. In every case, these students had died because of medical negligence. Symptoms missed, conditions misdiagnosed, warning signs ignored by previous school nurses. She started staying late, poring over the old files, trying to understand the pattern. The deceased students weren't appearing randomly. They were coming to her in chronological order of their deaths. And according to her research, there was still more to come. The most recent death was in 2019. A student named Marcus Thompson who died from an allergic reaction during a school lunch. The nurse on duty had administered the wrong medication, turning a survivable emergency into a fatal mistake. Margaret realized with growing horror that she was reliving every medical failure in the school's history. But why? And more importantly, what happened when she reached the end of the list? That's when she discovered the final file, the one that made her blood freeze in her veins. At the very back of the cabinet, in a folder marked pending, was a medical record with her own name on it. Margaret Chen, date of birth matching her own, but the date of death was listed as November 15, 2023, just 2 weeks away. Cause of death: severe allergic reaction, administered epinephrine to self, wrong dosage, fatal error. Margaret stared at her own death certificate in disbelief. The handwriting was hers, but she had no memory of writing it. According to the file, she would suffer a severe allergic reaction at school and, in her panic, administer the wrong dose of epinephrine, causing cardiac arrest. But Margaret wasn't allergic to anything. She'd been tested multiple times throughout her medical career. She flipped through more pages in her file and found detailed medical records spanning back months. Records of visits to doctors she'd never seen, test results showing developing allergies she didn't have, prescriptions for medications she'd never taken. Someone, or something, was rewriting her medical history in real time. That's when Margaret heard them. Footsteps in the hallway outside her office. Slow, deliberate steps of multiple people walking in unison. She looked up to see them standing in her doorway. All of them. Every student who had died due to medical negligence at Riverside High School. Sarah Mitchell with her smoke-stained clothes. Tommy Rodriguez clutching his stomach. Jennifer Walsh with her hands pressed to her temples. David Kim with his hand over his heart. And behind them, dozens more. Students from every decade since the school opened, all bearing the marks of their deaths.
You have to understand, Mrs. Chen. This isn't about punishment. It's about correction.
I don't understand. I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't hurt anyone.
Not yet, but you will. On November 15th, a student named Amy Parker will come to you with what appears to be a panic attack. But it's actually anaphylactic shock from a severe peanut allergy.
You'll misdiagnose it as anxiety, just like the nurse did with me. You'll give her a sedative instead of epinephrine.
Amy will die because you missed the signs, just like they missed mine.
Then I'll be ready. I'll know what to look for. I can save her.
That's not how it works. The pattern must complete itself. But there is another way.
The students parted, revealing a figure Margaret hadn't noticed before. An older woman in a nurse's uniform from the 1960s.
I was the first nurse at Riverside High. I made the first fatal mistake. Missed the signs of Tommy's appendicitis. I've been trying to correct the pattern ever since, but I can only watch. I can't intervene.
What do you mean, intervene?
Every nurse who's worked here has been part of the pattern. We each make one fatal mistake, then spend eternity trying to prevent the next one. But we can't change the past, only influence the future.
Margaret realized the horrible truth. Mrs. Rodriguez, the nurse who'd left suddenly, she must have seen her own file, her own predicted death.
So I run? I quit like Mrs. Rodriguez did?
Mrs. Rodriguez didn't quit, Mrs. Chen. Check her file.
Margaret's hands shook as she pulled Mrs. Rodriguez's file from the cabinet. The death certificate was there, dated just 3 months ago. Cause of death: self-administered overdose of insulin, discovered in nurse's office after hours. Mrs. Rodriguez had tried to escape the pattern by taking her own life, but even that had become part of the cycle.
You can't run from it, Mrs. Chen. You can't change it. But you can choose how it ends.
Margaret looked around the room at the faces of all the students who had died needlessly. Their eyes weren't filled with malice. They were pleading, desperate.
What do you want from me?
Break the cycle. When Amy Parker comes to you on November 15th, you have a choice. You can make the same mistake we all made, or
You can sacrifice yourself to save her.
Use the epinephrine on yourself. Create the allergic reaction. Die in her place.
It's the only way to break the pattern. The only way to save all the students who would come after.
You're asking me to commit suicide.
We're asking you to choose who lives and who dies. You or every student who would suffer from medical negligence in this building for decades to come.
Margaret realized the cosmic horror of her situation. She was trapped in a supernatural loop where death was inevitable. The only variable was who would die and how many lives she could save by making the ultimate sacrifice.
And if I refuse? If I just try to save Amy without dying myself?
then you'll make the mistake anyway. The pattern will ensure it. Amy will die, and the cycle will continue with the next nurse.
But if you break it, if you choose sacrifice over self-preservation, then Amy lives. And no future nurse will be bound by the pattern.
Margaret looked down at her own file, at the predicted date of her death just 10 days away.
How do I know you're telling the truth? How do I know this isn't just some elaborate delusion?
The students began to fade, becoming translucent in the fluorescent light.
You'll know on November 15th, Mrs. Chen. When Amy Parker walks through that door, you'll know everything we've told you is real.
The choice will be yours. Save yourself or save them all.
Margaret Chen disappeared on November 15th, 2023. The official report stated that she suffered a severe allergic reaction while treating a student and accidentally administered a fatal dose of epinephrine to herself while trying to treat her symptoms. The student she was treating, Amy Parker, survived a severe anaphylactic episode thanks to Margaret's quick and accurate diagnosis. But here's what the official report didn't mention. In Margaret's final medical notes, found on her desk after her death, she had written detailed instructions for treating anaphylactic shock. Instructions that were far more comprehensive and accurate than anything in the school's medical protocols. She had also left a note recommending that the school install additional epinephrine auto-injectors in every classroom and train all teachers in their proper use. Riverside High School implemented every one of her recommendations. In the 5 years since Margaret's death, they've successfully treated 12 severe allergic reactions without a single fatality. The new school nurse, hired after Margaret's death, reports no unusual incidents, no mysterious files, no visits from deceased students, no supernatural manifestations. The pattern, it seems, has been broken. But sometimes late at night when she's organizing medical files, the current nurse finds additional notes in Margaret's handwriting. Instructions for treating rare conditions, warnings about overlooked symptoms, reminders about the importance of listening to what patients don't say as much as what they do. Margaret Chen saved Amy Parker's life by sacrificing her own. But her real legacy lives on in every student who receives proper medical care at Riverside High. Some might call it coincidence. Others might say it's just good medical training and improved protocols. But I have to wonder, when faced with an impossible choice between self-preservation and sacrifice, how many of us would choose to save others at the cost of our own lives? Margaret Chen made that choice, and in doing so, she proved that sometimes The most profound act of healing requires the ultimate sacrifice. This has been Horror Shadows. Remember, the greatest horrors aren't always the ones that take life. Sometimes they're the ones that demand we give our own.